Stop. Before you leave a comment about the Epic Games Store, note that I already made a video about that topic. Check the suggested video in the top right. Watch that one, then come back here. I still will be here, I promise. This video is going to be talking about how good Metro Last Light is. 4A Games is a fantastic developer, and I don't think the controversy of the future should affect their past games. Last Light is a great example of a sequel that outshines the original critically acclaimed game. People loved Metro 2033, and somehow Last Light managed to be better than the original in every way. All of this was done without drastically changing anything. The movement feels just like the first game. The shooting more or less feels like the first game. The graphics, while improved, still have the aesthetics of the first game. Yet how is it the second game ended up being so much better? 4A Games has the advantage of their game being based off of a novel. If you watched my previous video about Metro 2033, you know how much of a benefit this is. A big cornerstone of the Metro franchise is not only the plot and story, but the atmosphere. These things alone don't carry the game, but they come pretty close to it. You're already familiar with Metro's world, so Last Light can't skimp on any details, and it needs to exceed what the first game did, or at minimum match it. However, 4A Games understood there needed to be at least some bit of change, and that change came in the outside world. In the original Metro, on the surface was simply a cold, harsh winter climate. But in Metro Last Light, you actually spend a pretty significant portion of the game outside. And outside is not suddenly a cold, harsh winter climate. Instead, rain has come back, putting some color into the world that wasn't seen in the original game. But with that rain also comes harsh storms, giving another element trying to kill you in this already harsh world. Just when it seems things are getting better on the top side, it still tries to kill you. These storms give a fantastic way to show off the improvements they've made to the original engine. The game does look better than the first one, but all of these changes aren't too drastic to make it look like an entirely different franchise. It's mostly a lot of smaller things, better lighting, stuff like that. But small things add up, and Metro Last Light was a benchmark for many years. This video doesn't truly do it justice as I wasn't streaming at a great frame rate or at a high resolution. You really will have to play this game on your own at the highest settings to get how beautiful it looks. And this game came out in 2013, it's 6 years old now. Unfortunately, it has the same problem the original Metro had, with an FOV a little bit too small. It's 80, which isn't terrible, but definitely below standards. Thankfully, you can change this in a config file, but the animations aren't really made for a higher FOV, so it might look a little bit weird. I only bumped it up to 90 because I didn't want to risk the animations really getting broken if I bumped it any higher than that. Regardless, this is the only complaint I have, and the game still looks fantastic all these years later. Gameplay-wise, the game aged very well. Combat's still fun, plenty of variety with enemies, plenty of variety with the guns sound loud and punchy, and the maps give you numerous ways to approach enemies in any way you want to. The map design is really where the gameplay ended up getting a lot better than the first game. The first game wasn't bad, so to say, but it had rather limited stealth options, and the map design itself was, well, not that fantastic. The game didn't put you into a big combat arena that replicated something you'd see in a multiplayer game. You did have some multiple paths, but again, the scope was limited. In Last Light, you can really see how much they've learned from the first game. I feel like Metro 2033 was really just focusing on the atmosphere and trying to stay true to the novel, whereas Metro Last Light was really trying to improve the gameplay. Last Light used a tried and true approach to shooters, putting a set number of enemies into a map that seemed like it was more designed for a multiplayer arena, and letting the person take the enemies out in any way they wanted. Now, Last Light still occasionally did a defense-styled mission, but for the most part, you had free choice over how to approach. The only downside to this is that stealthing wasn't too difficult, and it was the optimal thing to do. So if you liked combat, well, you're not going to be shooting as much as you'd prefer. And that's an intentional choice. The game is supposed to feel slightly survival, so you don't want to have to shoot at enemies, but if you find that fun, you still want to do it some more. And I really can't stress how good the guns feel. They felt good in the first game, but the second game just has more options for you. I always thought it was strange that in the first game, in a game based off the nuclear apocalypse, there was no bolt-action rifles. A bolt-action rifle is one of the easiest things to manufacture instead of an automatic, so the fact that they were gone entirely was odd. Well, in Last Light they added bolt-action rifles, and they are so satisfying. I'm not usually much of a sniper person, but there's just something that feels so right about these. They perfectly fit the aesthetic of the rest of the game, and they just sounded powerful. There was plenty of other new weapons added in as well that had some upgrades that were pretty interesting. The lowlife could be completely upgraded to a fully automatic machine pistol, something like you would see in an M712. But at the same time, most of your favorite weapons like the quad-barreled shotgun or the shambler came back from the first game. And that's truly what made Last Light's combat better than the original game. You have all the same options that the first game gives you, plus a lot more. At first I was going to criticize how Last Light did the plot in-game, as it does seem to sort of glance over a lot of details rather quickly. But the reason for that is simply because you're missing out on a lot of information put in the novel, much like how a movie is too short to really portray a full book. At least that's what I thought, and then I realized that they're pushing you through certain sections of the game faster so you can get to the more interesting sections that just build up the plot later. For example, the beginning of the game could have gone on for 2 hours. There is so much information here to take on. Instead, they kept it to a brief meeting that told you all the information you needed to know and pushed you out to combat. And this intro still ended up being fairly long, so I feel like there's a lot of stuff here that they cut out from the final game. With all of this said, you don't need to read the books to understand what's going on in the game, and that's what I find so fantastic about Metro. The games themselves hold up as their own piece of art. Completely understandable, you don't need to have any more context outside of the game. And despite what I said, it doesn't feel like it's skimping you on details either. It just feels like there's a lot of smaller stuff they want to tell you, but for the sake of time, they don't. Metro 2033's story is pretty straightforward. The Dark Ones are a threat to the Metro, you need to get rid of them. Last Light is not so straightforward. Last Light's story has 3 things going on, and they all connect with each other. Last Light's story has 3 parts to it. At the beginning of the game, you find out there's one Dark One left. They want to kill it, but you want to keep it alive. Plot device number 1, the Dark One. They send Anna with you, a sniper, to kill the Dark One. She's plot device number 2. And throughout the game, you slowly find out that the Reds want to take over D6. Plot device number 3. Some games with the best stories have 3 different plot devices that all connect, and this is one of them. To make another example, the Darkness One. The Darkness One has Jackie, the main character dealing with Jenna, your girlfriend, Jackie's involvement with the Mafia, and Jackie's infestation by the Darkness. All these 3 things connect together throughout multiple points in the game. Suspension of disbelief is a major factor when it comes to being immersed in games, and somehow in a game about the darkness, something that seems like it should be an edgy 15-year-old's dream, it manages to stay believable. I might make a full video about the darkness in the future, I love this game. But Last Light does the same thing, although I do have one complaint. Anna starts the game as an outright bitch to Artyom. You get separated from her and then meet her later on in the game, and somehow she's incredibly nice to you and then you bang her. And I'm not really glossing over anything, that's pretty much how it played out. I'm sure in the novel there's a lot more written about her and this relationship, but in the game, it could have been a little bit better. This is the one flaw I have with the game. Usually characters that you interact change gameplay for the positive. And there's no better example than that very dark one I was talking about earlier. Keep in mind, in the original, in Metro 2033, you were the bringer of mass genocide to his entire race. Yet the game doesn't ever pull the pity card on you. At least not directly in your face. A lot of other writers would have constantly reminded you and rubbed it in your face that, hey, you kind of killed his whole race and he's the only one left and you should feel bad. Last Light doesn't do this. The only time it mentions this is an offhanded remark that didn't come across as angry or confrontational. It comes out in a way that makes you feel pity towards these odd alien-looking creatures in the same way that you feel pity towards the prawn in District 9. To go alongside with this, the entire second half of the game could have been an escort quest. And this would have made you hate this character. It doesn't matter how well written the character is, it doesn't matter how nice the character is to you, if the character is obnoxious in-game, you are not going to like that character. Instead, the Dark One is beneficial to you. He doesn't run at a slightly slower pace than your sprint, he doesn't walk at a slightly faster pace than your walk, he almost teleports from place to place out of your way. And if you don't see him, he's watching from above somewhere, giving you help. He'll occasionally walk to you and give you ammo or a health kit. He'll occasionally highlight enemies in the area and tell you whether they're actually bad and trying to kill you or whether they're friendly or not. And he doesn't start out this hospitable, he starts out reasonably afraid of you. Keep in mind, you killed his whole race. But as time goes along, he becomes more attached to you. This character arc coincides directly with the gameplay, and not many games do this. Usually the story stays in the cutscenes and the combat is completely out of place to what's actually going on. Instead, Last Light manages to blend combat, story, and graphics all together into this neat package that you can't help but get immersed in. The real question I had is, where do you take it from here? Because it seems that they've mastered this whole design, and they could just make another Metro, but it seems that they're taking a different route. It seems they're going semi-open world, and this is the only way they could push their gameplay farther. A linear approach limits what the player can do, and it can be fantastic for plot-driven games, but Metro also had a fairly deep gameplay element to it, so an open world kind of makes sense. A lot of people seem somewhat angry at this, saying it just looks like another Far Cry, but at the same time I'd like to remind them of another open world game that does this fantastically well, Stalker. We'll see how it plays out in the end, but for now we can look at Last Light as one gem of a game. That sums up my Metro Last Light analysis. I hope you all have enjoyed it. As a friendly reminder, if you haven't clicked the bell notification next to the subscribe button, you probably won't be alerted that I'm posting new videos, so be sure to do that. Despite all the controversy, I am going to be streaming Metro Exodus. If you want to come watch that, check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/JerrickForGamingDragon, and if you want to help further, you can check out my Patreon or subscribe on Twitch. I rely on this to pay my bills and rent. You have no idea how much this helps me. But that's it. Thanks all of you for watching, and I will see you over on my Twitch.